Hey everyone, I want to welcome you to the latest in our series of thought leadership conversations. I'm Dave Cowling, CEO of NovusNorth. Today, we'll be speaking with Niall Kennedy. Niall is product director at YellowDog, the cloud workflow management company, where he drives product strategy and development on YellowDog's innovative platform. Hey Niall, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Would you mind taking a minute and introducing yourself?
Sure. As you were saying, my name is Niall Kennedy, again, product director at YellowDog. I've been in product management since 2008, roughly. Prior to that, I had roles in development management, client services, professional services. And my first product role was really in the Fintech space. So we did a lot of work in developing platforms for price discovery in capital markets, but also things like post-trade processing, which is all about managing positions, risk, P&L, and so forth. I joined YellowDog in 2018, and at the time we were moving towards a platform that we had developed for multiple industries within the cloud management workload space.
Fabulous with that background. I think we're going to have a great conversation. So why don't we start off with kind of the overview. If you could tell us about your product and the problems you solve.
Yeah, so YellowDog is a cloud workload management company. So really what that's all about is making sure that people who have compute intensive workloads that need to be done, that they can access cloud resources anywhere that they need to get them, really at any scale that they need to get them at, anywhere in the world. And if you think in the last couple of years, we've had the global pandemic, the COVID-19 vaccines that have hopefully helped us all overcome this pandemic in probably a quicker time than not, are developed using compute intensive simulations that were provided, luckily, free of charge to the various research institutes throughout the world. But the key thing is the outcome, which is those vaccines are available to people at in a really short period of time compared to historically the development of other vaccinations over time. So we're all about workload management, getting it done in the cloud, and getting it done at the scale that people need to get it done at.
I love that example, Niall. That's certainly one we can all relate to, having seen how fast the COVID vaccines were brought to market.
Mm-hmm.
Your product, though, is kind of interesting. It's in an emerging space. As such, how do you understand or anticipate what your customer needs are going to be, and how do you make the right bets?
I think the key thing really is focusing on outcomes. So if you're going to be one of the questions we ask people in various different sessions is, what would you do if you had a supercomputer for the weekend? And they kind of go, oh, well, I would do this and I would do that. But the key thing that people kind of gravitate towards is outcomes. Oh, I would make, for example, a new climate model, or I would do X, Y, and Z. And I think if you make if people kind of gravitate towards those outcomes that they're used to, the key then what YellowDog is enabling is the massive acceleration of those outcomes. And also for people who really are not in a industry that would be, for example, synonymous with using high performance computing or using supercomputing, to say, actually, I can get to my outcome pretty quickly using a tool like YellowDog. So I'll give you some examples. We have the example of where we started off was in the CGI industry. So that's computer generated imagery for things like movies and animations. Being able to allow them to develop a lot more of that great content using the cloud to actually do the rendering that's required. There's other kind of parallel type patterns and abstracts that we have as well in things like automotive, aeronautics, life sciences, where simulation tools are used to drive the models that will ultimately become the physical things that we can put our hands on. And it's really, I was at a conference recently about actually, funny enough, the COVID-19 vaccinations. And the key thing a lot of the researchers say is compacting that time to science, which again, not to belay to repeat what we're saying, but that's a great outcome of using compute at scale.
I love that phrase, compacting time to science. It kind of says it all in kind of our accelerated world. With this capability, what does this change mean for your customers?
I think it's a number of different things. We have customers that are would effectively already maybe have on-premise computers or on-premise compute grids that they've used over a period of years, and you have customers then who are effectively cloud native, who are who are used to operating in the cloud. But essentially, what it boils down to is a move from an allocation model. So, for example, we go out and we buy office supplies, or we buy office desks, and we say, you sit here, you sit there, and you allocate that particular cost to that particular cost center, and that might get depreciated over 3 to 4 years, who knows. But if you had to go out and rent the chair, then you're moving to a consumption model. And I think the key thing from a philosophical standpoint is moving from a allocation model to a consumption model, where ultimately you're moving from a capex to an opex view of the world when you're using compute. But the key thing with this really is, again, it's all about outcomes. It's consumption versus allocation is one thing you've got to be aware of, but it's also, again, compacting that time to science. What would you do in your business if you could shorten product life cycle durations and get stuff out the door quicker?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and it one of my interpretations is it provides access to compute that organizations might not have had in a prior iteration, where you had to put all that capital expenditure out to build that compute platform.
Exactly.
So I love that. Maybe a quick pivot. We talked about being an emerging industry. By definition, in an emerging industry, things are always changing. How do you stay relevant? How do you stay on top of what the next thing is that you need to do?
Yeah, there's the old adage, which is fail fast. I think I would, considering the questions of pivot, I would pivot that definition a little bit more as well, by saying what you really need to get is actionable insight. So you really need to be able to actually get early market feedback. And in certain cases, you may be in a situation where you have a section of your product or a part of your product which effectively is good and people can see the value, but you might be a little bit early coming to the market with that. But there's no harm in going out and getting that particular feedback from people, and being totally honest with them, and them being totally honest with you. But the key thing is, there's stuff that you develop sometimes can come in a cycle. So, get the actionable insight as soon as you can, keep it, park it, it may come back again around in a different kind of a cycle, and continually be executing, inspecting, and adapting, because nobody has the monopoly on being right. You really have to go through cycles on this. And in an emerging industry, trends don't develop suddenly. They're not stuff you can look up on the internet, kind of go, yeah, there's the trend. These things might take time to appear. They may change, but the key thing is always be inspecting, always be adapting.
No, I love that. And I know we were talking earlier, we talked not just about gaining the insight, but also this notion of timing, and that it might be the right idea but the wrong time. So occasionally you'll go out there and sort of put something on the back shelf and wait for it to mature, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I know we pivoted off of fail fast into actionable insights, but many people are kind of talk about fail fast, but then penalize or avoid failing altogether and create sort of this cultural bias against trying stuff. Sounds like you haven't done that. How do you build a culture that enables developing these actionable insights?
Yeah, I think a key would be not to call it fail fast as such, and that's why I prefer the term actionable insight, because it doesn't have a negative connotation per se. It's you could actually succeed fast as well, which people kind of don't think of as something that's in the negative sphere of things. But you have to be open, and you have to be open with your culture in a company. People have to know that this is something we're trying out, or this is something that our research leads us to here, but we need to go out and talk to people. And we need to be have that culture of openness, so people understand that this, there may be things here that we may not take forward. There may be things that we might accelerate. There may be things that we might park. But the key thing is you have to have that culture of openness, and ultimately, it goes back to the old. There's no I in team. It has to be shared wins and losses. There's none of this kind of inventor type thing who goes out and suddenly the whole company is lifted by this thing. It's a collegiate and a all-encompassing effort to get product out the door these days. And the key thing is shared wins, shared losses.
That's fabulous. I definitely appreciate the shared nature and thinking as a team. For to make this actionable, what would you say are the top 3 lessons or tips that you'd share with product managers that are in emerging tech spaces?
I think from my perspective is there's a lot of reading and researching, looking at other industries, and finding is there a path to where their industry has evolved and matured. Is there parallels that you can draw from that? And I think as humankind, we tend to be following, some kind of, in my opinion, some kind of big strands of things, and it's just different. We're on different parts of the journey in different industries. I think that's the first thing is always read and research and look for parallels in other places and see how those industries have developed. What has happened to the products in those industries? How have they stayed relevant? Test driving, as we said about the actionable insight, is really, really important. Even if it's written down, or you have a conversation with a potential prospect at an event or at an exhibition, test drive, ask the question, what would you do? What would you do if you had a supercomputer for the weekend? And, you may get, many different answers, but test driving is really, really key. And I think lastly, even though test driving is a great thing, if you can represent things visually, like in a prototype style, you get more and more of people kind of going, I see where you're going with this. And the interesting thing about that is because people have different backgrounds and biases and different experiences, you may be then looking to your prototype and then actually looking left and right of it and not down the center of it, kind of going, wow, that was interesting. But I think a lot of people see things visually and they kind of go, oh, I get it. I see what you mean. What if you did this? And they'd start pointing at a screen or pointing at a piece of paper going, if you did this, this would really help me out. And I think, for an emerging space, that's sometimes the best thing is, even if you have to draw crayons, something visual that people can put their hands on is so much better than not.
I love that. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and I've seen that in action.
Exactly.
Maybe the last question to wrap this up. If you're thinking about folks looking to get into product management or maybe earlier in their career, what would you recommend they do as they enter product management in the emerging tech space?
I think for product management in general, I think from my experience of it, and again, this is just purely my experience, is having, quite, if you can, have either knowledge or experience in the other pieces of the business that kind of drive a business towards its existence, towards its continuing viability. So, for example, my experience was in development management. It was in professional services, client services. So I got to see it from an implementation side of things. I got to see it from a support side of things. And I think that kind of gives you a more rounded view of the experience of not only the people using your software day to day, but also the people who implement it, the people who support it. So, what are their thought processes? What are their experiences? For emerging industries, it's a little bit harder, I think, because without the best will in the world, sometimes to put your finger in an emerging industry is a harder thing. I think from my experience, and I think I've said it further up, is reading and researching, even if it's outside of your direct space, is always a good thing to do. Follow the people, the Bill Gates of the world, or follow the Mark Cubans of the world, or whoever, just to see what they're talking about and kind of get a feel for general trends, and then look for companies that seem to be making a difference in those particular spaces. And be flexible. You know, sometimes, you know, people come into a role with experience, but sometimes it's more about the nous to know, okay, is there parallels? What else can we bring to bear on this? Because, you know, a new industry, is a new industry. There may not be always a reference point which you can sail your ship by, as it were.
Oh, that's fantastic advice. I definitely appreciate that, Niall. This brings our time to a close. Thank you for spending this time with us, and have a great day. Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
for having me.